Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here. I don't think I've ever spoken in front of this group, and it's wonderful to be here today to talk a little bit about the Hardwood Federation and what we're doing. I have to say my remarks today are almost exclusively on trade. I've told people before, I've run away from trade issues my entire career because they're hard and difficult, and nobody ever agrees. And today, what we are facing in the hardwood industry is almost completely focused on trade, and that's what our members are really, really concerned about, and so we'll chat a little bit about that. So the Hardwood Federation is, we like to say, is the voice of the hardwood industry. We were established in 2004 by a group of hardwood association executives who got together and said there's a lot of hardwood associations and trade groups and lumbermen's clubs out there, but nobody is really in Washington, D.C. expressing our opinions and our thoughts and concerns in a consolidated kind of way. So they put together the Hardwood Federation. We are a federation of associations. We have 28 now. I need to update my bio. Thank you, Tom, very much. But I'm pleased to say we are 28 hardwood business organizations from around the country. And here's a list, which you probably can't read, but it includes everybody from the National Hardwood Lumber Association, the National Wood Products Association, the National Wood Floor Association. We have the Railway Tie Association, Kitchen Cabinets. We also have a number of state organizations that are involved with us, regional groups, including the Appalachian Hardwood Manufacturers Incorporated, and we have a number of lumbermen's clubs. All of these folks have in common the desire to speak to federal policymakers about what they're doing in Washington, D.C. that impacts their bottom line. And we are very honored to represent them in Washington, D.C. We're a very small organization. There's 2 full-time members and a part-time lobbyist that we employ. But I think we do a pretty good job of expressing our thoughts and concerns and really trying to get them to understand the policies that are in front of them and how they impact us. As Jane mentioned, we work very closely with NAFO, we work with AFMPA, and we work with just about anybody that we can think of that will help further our message and our goals. The hardwood industry is an important one, and last year we were really excited. I was personally very excited to do the first ever hardwood economic impact study. And what we found is that in 2016, the direct economic impact in the US of the hardwood industry was about $135.6 billion, employing 700,000 workers. And if you go even further and you look at kind of the ripple effect jobs and the related jobs, it's about a $350 billion industry with almost 2 million jobs. So a huge industry that people we're a quiet industry, as we like to say. You know, we haven't been an industry that's really gone out there and beat the drum too much, but we are a significant and important industry, particularly in the rural economies. If you look at Georgia, we not only did the national statistics, but we also did each state. You'll see that it's about a $5 billion industry in direct economic impact with about 22,000 jobs. And if you go to kind of the broader look, it's about $8.8 billion with 50,000 jobs. So as Tom is saying, number one, you'll have to go back and look at our economic impact studies, Tom, and see where you fall in the hardwood industry. But we were really excited to see these numbers, and these are the kinds of statistics that make an impact when you go into members of Congress's office and you talk about how important the industry is to their state. Because really, when you talk to members of Congress, and I think Jane would agree, what they care about is they care about voters, how many voters are in their district, and they care about how many jobs. And they want to keep those voters happy, and one of the ways they do that is with jobs. So these are important numbers for us to use as we're talking to them. As I said, trade has been the number one issue. I look fondly back on the days when I was working on federal forest management reform and green building initiatives and the carbon neutrality issue which we worked on a lot with Jane. But today it's all about trade. And if this is kind of a timeline of the US-China trade conflict. And you can't see the dates on here, got a little bit messed up, but the starting point of this is January 2018, and the end point is kind of mid-2019. So this hasn't been going on very long, but it's had a tremendous impact on the industry. Since July of last year, there have been 3 rounds of US tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. And it's total about $250 billion. The third round of those tariff impositions resulted in retaliatory tariffs from the Chinese that included hardwood lumber products and hardwood logs. I think they also included southern yellow pine, although as the hardwood industry, we don't get into the softwood issues so much, but I do know that the pine was impacted as well. Each time the US put tariffs on Chinese products, the Chinese retaliated in kind. So what you see here is kind of this back and forth that's been going on. In June, July last year was when the hardwoods became involved, and I've got to tell you, just the talk about tariffs had a chilling effect on the industry, and we'll look at some charts that kind of show what happened. Since the trade war has been going on, and this is a comparison April of 2019 to April of 2018, US imports from China have decreased about 17.8%. US exports to China have decreased by about 34%. So our exports to China are being impacted a lot more than the Chinese exports here to the US. Lumber has been particularly hard hit, decreasing by about 50%. And this chart here is kind of all wood products and all wood. So you see about a 50% decline in wood exports to China, which is an incredibly important market for us. And here you can see kind of the division about where hardwood grade lumber goes. And this doesn't include logs, but it does include grade lumber. And you can see that the domestic market takes up about 55%. And the vast majority of that goes into industrial products, pallets, mats, railway ties. About 20% goes to other export markets, 25% going to China. China was a huge market for us. $4 billion in total exports, this is 2018 figures, $4 billion in total exports of grade lumber, $2 billion worth of that went to China. So that was a huge market for us. And it's even more interesting when you get into this that hardwoods, US hardwoods actually had a trade surplus with China of about $1.5 billion. And the president likes to talk about the surplus and the trade deficit. You know, we were one of those rare industries where we actually had a trade surplus. So if you just look here, this shows the world's largest hardwood lumber exporters. The US is by far the largest hardwood exporter. Even today, in kind of this declining market that we have, we are still pretty far ahead of Thailand and Malaysia. And conversely, the largest hardwood importer in the world is China. And you can see China just blows everybody else away. I think if you add up all of those other countries that are listed there, you get about where you equal out to what China has been importing. And you can see that the gray is 2017, or 2016, then 17, then 18. You can see, you know, things were moving up in their exports. They've declined slightly, and that's because of their slowing economy. But they're still far and away the biggest importer of hardwood. I will say one note, though, I don't think Vietnam actually reports. So it's a little bit hard to see, it's hard to see where they come in here, but they are a big importer as well, but they don't touch China. In fact, I think they're the next largest importer of American hardwoods, and they're about 10% of what China imports. So it's a pretty big jump there. This is a little bit of a complicated chart, and I hope you can see it up here, but the red line is China over the last about 20 years. It starts in 2000. And what you can see is that China has, you know, around 2008, 2009, there was kind of a nice mix of the countries that were importing US hardwoods. And it's Canada is the kind of the gray line. Underneath that is the European Union, the 23 countries in the European Union. The blue line is Mexico, and then Vietnam. So you see 2008, 2009, it was kind of, you know, kind of a nice mix. Everybody's kind of in the middle there. Then China explodes, and that was because their economy exploded. And in this exploding economy, they were building a lot. And what they wanted was American hardwoods to be the finished products within that building. Everybody else started to decline. They just weren't importing the American hardwoods that China was. So you can see, you know, this is where kind of this dependence for American hardwood exporters started. And in 2008, you also had our economic collapse. And companies were looking for places to sell their wood. And it wasn't domestically. So the Chinese market opened up, and companies jumped into that market, and very successfully. Here you can see again, kind of how that, China was pretty low for a number of years. It's there in the red. But then 2008, 2009, 2010, all of a sudden you get this explosion. And up until the last 3 or 4 years, it's been about 50% of the US export market. And in particular, the Chinese market was hungry for red oak, and you can see here how much more red oak we are selling in China. It's the red line, of course. Just tremendous amounts of red oak has been going to China. Likewise, cherry. And the Chinese, for some reason, they love their dark woods. Dark woods in the US and in Europe, that's not popular anymore. People are going for white kitchens, they're going for lighter kitchens, they're going for lighter floors. They're going for some darker floors, but it's not the cherry and it's not the red oak. It's coming away from that red look. But the Chinese have been very, very, very kind of in love with those woods, and that has been the market. There's no place else to really sell those woods. And this is probably the most chilling slide that I'll show you today. This shows what happened just in the last 3 quarters, the last 3 reported quarters of the tariffs that have been imposed on hardwoods by Chinese, and these are the retaliatory tariffs. The last 3 quarters, and actually these are the reported quarters, so this is kind of like the last 2 quarters of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019, exports were down an average of about $153 million per quarter. So we're approaching about $500 million in lost export dollars over the last 3 quarters. It's about 42% decline in exports to China. And as you can imagine, this has had a dramatic impact on the industry. Here you can kind of see a historic depiction of how exports have looked over the last several years. The yellow line is 2018. And you can see things were going really well in 2018. The lighter gray lines below that are the lines of 2016, 17, and then you get into 18. And you can see that every year, exports to China were going up, and they kind of followed the same pattern. And you can see where the decline started in 2018. It's kind of that June, July period where they just dropped. Things kind of evened off a little bit, and there was kind of a window of opportunity where the tariffs weren't being imposed, and exports went up. And then they immediately declined again because you were running into Christmas, you were running into the Chinese New Year, and you were running into a January deadline that said, the 10% tariffs that we have right now are going up to 25%. The president and President Xi got together at the end of December, and those tariffs kind of came off, or they steadied at 10%. They said, we're going to keep them at 10% while we continue to negotiate. And so, the Chinese New Year, the red line, things continued to decline, but then they started to go back up again because we were at 10%. Industry was kind of like, we can deal with 10%, we can make it work. It hurts. It's not killing us, it hurts. But we can make this work, and we're going to, stay the course. Things started to go up. What you don't see here, because we don't have the final numbers yet, as soon as the president tweeted on Sunday night in late May, I think it was the last Sunday in May, or the first Sunday in June, he tweeted that he was extremely annoyed with the Chinese because they kind of had reneged on a bunch of agreements that they had made and backed off on some agreements that they said that they would move forward to in the trade negotiations. And the president said no more, 25% tariffs. The Chinese responded in kind, as they have every single time. Ramped everything up to 25% or 20%, depending on the species and whether it's a log or lumber. And what we will probably be showing, I'm quite sure, is that red line just drops. The president sent the tweet out on Sunday night. I think Tuesday morning, I took more calls at the Hardwood Federation in one day than I've ever taken on another day, just from companies in absolute panic, because shipments were canceled on the water, shipments were turned around. They were getting calls from Chinese customers saying that we're just going to renegotiate, or this is what you'll get paid. We're not even going to negotiate. And in some cases, they were just dumping lumber, and I'm sure you have some stories about that as well. But it was chilling. It had a chilling impact on the industry. Here's kind of another way to look at it if you'd rather look at maybe a bar chart. But you can see the yellow line is 2019, the red line's 2018, blue line's 2017. You can see pretty graphically when the trade war kind of heated up and related to the hardwood industry and the impact that it's had. And you know, a lot of times, especially when we've been in office just talking about the situation and just kind of letting people know what the impact has been on the industry, they say, well, find other markets. Just, you know, it's easy. Just go out and find some other markets. It's not that easy. As you've seen from the previous slides, you know, there aren't any other markets that are willing to take the amount of wood that we were shipping to China. And the other problem is that the percentage of US hardwoods that the Chinese are consuming right now is going down, and they are starting to look at other countries in terms of where they're getting their woods. You know, 2018, it was about 27% US hardwoods going to China, or that was the percentage of US hardwoods that China was importing, down from 31% in 2017. It's down to about 19% in 2019, and where you see them picking up and buying more woods are from places like Gabon in Africa and Russia. So not only are we losing those markets, and it's very doubtful that we can ever get those full markets back and reestablish those relationships that we've probably lost, but you know, those countries that they're buying their woods from, and this kind of goes to Jane's story about sustainability and you know how we cut trees but we plant trees and we harvest legally. These are countries that aren't actually harvesting legally, so it's really hard to tell what kind of long-term impacts these kinds of harvesting levels are going to have environmentally in those countries over the years. The future for US hardwood, it's really kind of a big unknown. And I should say politically working this issue is really, really difficult. It's a situation where the policy here is being driven by about three people. Number one being the president, and two and three by whoever he happens to be talking with that day. He is very firm on this issue. And I have to say, people that I deal with in my business and members of the Hardwood Federation board and members of the associations that we represent are very supportive of the president. They understand why he's doing what he's doing. They understand that China has in many ways been a bad actor and needs to, you know, have kind of a come to Jesus. But they are also very, very concerned about what this is going to do long-term to their business. And they have been desperately trying to educate lawmakers and the Department of Agriculture and other people in policy and decision-making capacity that, you know, the hardwood industry is an agricultural industry. We need some assistance, just like people that grow corn or that grow soybeans or that raise pigs or cows. So really the approach we have been taking is that while we understand what the president's doing, and by and large our industry supports him and his approach, we need to get some relief here. We've also, of course, been encouraging them to get back to the negotiating table and, you know, start the talks back up because, you know, nothing's going to get resolved if they're not sitting down and talking to each other. But basically, our main ask of the US government at this point is figure out a way to give us some kind of, even if it's minimal relief, so that we can continue to have a US hardwood economy going forward. And where we're really concerned with is that the mill side of things will disappear. Because I think, you know, the Chinese would like nothing more than to just be importing our raw materials and establishing their own kind of mill working operations and completely cut kind of the value added component of the hardwood industry out of it. So we are very cognizant of the fact that anything that we do really needs to be a combination of assistance, logs and lumber, and trade agreements that support both log and lumber exports. So that's kind of where we are right now, and I'm happy to talk to anybody that's interested. I'm happy to take stories, because when you tell us your stories, that makes our visits to Capitol Hill and to the administration even more powerful. Thank you again for having me here, and I look forward to hearing about the ports.